carrying out one of the most important projects of Somalia's digital landscape. Is the recipe project, in short, for recentering civic engagement through the internet, through partnership. So we are really engaged through that. And in short, we are working through the landscape of accountability and conducting all sorts of public engagement through peace building and all that sort of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Haythem?
Hello, everyone. So I'm Haythem Benzid. I work with OXFAM in North Africa. I'm the communication and media lead for the cluster of North Africa in OXFAM. I'm also a freelance journalist specialist in digital rights, and I'm the focal point of RECEIVE project implemented in 10 countries in the Global South. And we are implementing this project in Tunisia with other partners and journalists. I will talk about it later. Thank you.
Naro?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Naro Omo-Osagie. I'm a lawyer from Nigeria, and I work at AccessNow as the Africa Policy and Advocacy Manager. So AccessNow is the co-host of this session. We're a global digital rights organization. We work at the intersection of human rights and technology. We work across issues of freedom of expression online, privacy, data protection, digital ID. So I come from Nigeria and I live in Nigeria, and I will be talking about one of the, what I call the major challenges to the full implementation of our Data Protection Act, which is Nigeria's SIM-NIN linkage policy. And I also want to say this session is very early for so many people, and it's incredibly humbling to see how many people just woke up early just to come and hear us talk. So thank you all so much for being here.
Great, thank you. Thank you all. So let's now switch to Kenya and Grace. So start just talk a little bit about the data protection law that Kenya has, and recognizing that that's relatively advanced data protection law. And we'll be interested to see where do you see the biggest gaps in its implementation?
All right, thank you very much, Bill. The Data Protection Act of 2019 in Kenya is a very progressive law, and it safeguards personal data and ensures organizations handle it responsibly. So some of the biggest challenges we have observed, I'll start with compliance. We've had quite a big challenge in compliance of the Data Protection Act. And just to start you off with some information, especially on the state, we have noticed that state-owned corporations are not complying with the Data Protection Act. And just to share with you some statistics, according to a Kickternet report, as of April 2024, the Data Protection, ODPC, had only issued 5,000 registration certificates to entities. And out of these entities, only 86, approximately 86 registered entities were state entities. So these figures are concerning because when you look at the data from the Business Registration Service in Kenya, we have about 105,000 registered companies, and only that means 90% of these companies are not registered, meaning that we need continued efforts to actually promote awareness on compliance by data handlers. However, when speaking about state-owned enterprises, for example, regarding the registration, we have about 500 state corporations, and some are exempt. But when you look at it overall, when you only have 85 who are actually registered, then it shows that the government has a lackluster approach in compliance with the Data Protection Act. Secondly, we did have an interesting case on collection of sensitive and personal data. And I'd just like to share with you a case study in 2021. We did have a project known as WorldCoin project by Tools for Humanity. They were collecting and processing personal data in Kenya from 2021. They registered with the ODPC, and they were issued with certificates to continue with that process. But sometime in 2023, there was an upsurge because they were offering economic incentives for you to share your personal data. We had very long lines of hundreds of Kenyans in Nairobi at going to somewhere in town and giving information, especially you were going into a machine and they were taking details from your iris in your eyes. So it raised a lot of concerns for the country, and in, I think that was about in 2023 of August, the Ministry of Interior actually closed down the operations of WorldCoin. So this brings about three key issues that we observed. What is the place of economic incentives in consent? Because now, if you're paid to give your data, it undermines the validity of your consent. And then something interesting that WorldCoin did when the Office of the Data Protection Commission issued an cautionary statement in 2023 warning Kenyans about WorldCoin, they transferred all their responsibilities to the WorldCoin Foundation. So it shows us that data controllers, they should not be able to transfer their responsibilities to third parties. And finally, we do have a very good ODPC, Office of the Data Protection Commission, and it has an extensive mandate in oversight and enforcement of the Data Protection Act. But we feel like it should not constrain itself to only registration of entities. It should also focus a lot on oversight. And finally, as another example, in January 2025, I think late January, the business registration service in Kenya was hacked, and about 2 million users, there was a breach, suffered a major breach, and there were details of directors and their beneficial ownership details and such. So this exposed a lot of gaps in weak cybersecurity, and it showed data controllers and processors, they must implement technical and organizational measures to protect personal data. And also it brings to question if the BRS is actually a government institution and could not actually ensure that all this data is protected. What does that mean for us as Kenyans? So far, those are the key implementation challenges that we have identified. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right, thank you very much. And so how, just to quickly follow up on that, and thank you very much for sharing those examples. So how is civic engagement taking part in more or less, shaping these advocacy efforts that you guys have been doing in lines of data protection and
all right, thanks.
Cybersecurity?
Thanks, Bill. When we talk about civic engagement and digital rights in Kenya, a few things stand out for me. First, civic is critical in raising awareness, and then because now Kenyans now better understand their right to privacy, freedom of expression, and it cannot be, they understand that it should not be infringed and the remedies available. Secondly, we have a very vibrant civil society, and they do a lot of strategic litigation cases, which now really set the tone on jurisprudence on digital rights in Kenya. Third, civic actors have oftenly mobilized citizens to decry mass violations of privacy, freedom of expression, and they ensure that these issues remain in the spotlight and in the national agenda. And finally, to close on that, beyond that, civic actors are actively monitoring how government is implementing data protection laws and holding them to account in real time. So it's almost a whole holistic approach, but you can see the place of civil society in advancing digital rights, and it's continuous. It doesn't stop at that, yeah.
Thank you very much, Grace from Zalendo Trust for sharing that. So allow me to now cross over to Somalia. So Ahmed, Somalia is still in the early stages of building frameworks. What are the main barriers?
First of all, thank you for having me again. And I will want to go over the digital landscape of Somalia. First of all, we have the Data Protection Act in place since 2023. And that framework exists, and it creates the Data Protection Authority, but enforcement is still at the early stages. And also we have the cybercrime bill in place right now, 2025. It's approved by cabinet, and it's not yet passed by parliament. And this bill is very important, as we as civil society we're working to have our input in this crime bill and really have public participation in it. Now, when it comes to institutions in place in the digital landscape, we have the National Communications Authority and the SOMCERT, standing for the Somali Computer Emergency Response Team, and which is still in the early stages. And it's notable to mention that in the SOMCERT, we have our director, Ahmed, sitting across the room over there, as one of the steering committee members in that SOMCERT, which is really very important. As civil society, we can have our input and contribution to how that is formulated moving forward. We also have NIRA. NIRA stands for the National Identification and Registration Authority. Now we're in Somalia, we have the identification, the first time since a long, long time. Now we're working on having connecting different legal frameworks, for example, and financial frameworks like the banking sector and different government services with the identification, the new national identification framework. And all those are important in the digital landscape in Somalia. It's also, when I come to the main barriers in Somalia, in the digital landscape, we have these legal foundations in place, but it's really notable to know that the Data Protection Act and the Cybercrime Bill are foundations. However, they are not, these laws really remain on paper and they are not implemented. Also, the Data Protection Authority, which comes as a result of the act, is really underfunded and it really lacks technical independence, which is very important when you look at the Malabo Convention. The technical independence for these authorities is mentioned in one of the provisions. So for that reason, the DPA cannot yet audit and carry out sanctions or monitor effectively. Another barrier is that the public awareness is very low, as well as the civil society actors. Only minority of the citizens and these actors are aware of their digital rights. Another main barrier in place in Somalia is the fragmented governance, which really weakens the enforcement. In Somali context, we have a federal system of governance, and some of these entities within the federal system, some of them are autonomous, some of them declare independence outside of the republic. And this is really important to note that these laws cannot be implemented uniformly across the country while this fragmentation exists. Now, overall, rules without reach leave rights vulnerable. That's very important to know. And when it comes to, as civil society, our engagements, we have really carried out one of the most important assessments in the digital landscape under the Recipe project that I mentioned earlier. In this assessment, we wanted to know what are the capacities of the civil society and their awareness of their digital rights. We got to know that luckily 98% of the civil society are connected. They have internet, regular internet, but their digital literacy, their advanced digital literacy is really low. When it comes to their awareness of their digital rights and protections, only 38% know of their digital rights. And coming across the threats, 44% of these civil society organizations and their staff face breaches, data breaches, and 42% face digital violence, as they reported, 37% of which are gender-based. Now, as SONSA, through the Recipe Project, which is really led by OXFAM and co-funded by the EU, we have carried out this mapping as a baseline, the first time in Somali history, and to know these digital capacities. And as interventions, we have carried out capacity buildings and trainings, such as secure communications and to provide privacy tools to civil society actors. And we have engaged through rights-based advocacy. Also, we have carried out a policy brief, the first of the first one in the digital landscape. It's about the ICT policy, the national ICT policy and a strategy. So we were advocating the adoption of EU digital principles in that ICT policy. And then carrying out our advocacy and efforts, we have conducted several roundtables with the civil society actors and regulators, as well as privacy sector, such as the telecom companies at the same table. We brought them at the same table. And we talked about inclusive digital governance together, having this dialogue, which is very important. We have introduced this concept, which is fairly new in the civil society and digital landscape. First notable one is the social media policy. The government is currently putting in place a policy on the social media, and we are working across the board to have our input in that. And we in the near future, we will be producing also another policy brief on that, on the social media policy. And the awareness campaigns, when it comes to awareness campaigns, we have addressed tech-facilitated gender-based violence through the media as a campaign. We reached women and youth and marginalized communities. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Ahmed, for sharing that. And it's good to hear about all the, the laws and regulations and acts that are being put in place. You mentioned the Data Protection Act, you mentioned the Cybercrimes Bill 2025, you mentioned the NERA, the social media policy. But I think also the amazing work that you guys are doing on policy briefs and all that. So I guess just to link with the, more or less the regional frameworks, do you think that the regional instruments like the Malabo Convention could realistically shape Somalia's policy landscape?
Thank you. That's really a very important question, and I was really prepared for that question, coincidentally. Now, the Malabo Convention, the AU Malabo Convention is really important, and for data processing and to respect human rights, and to criminalize cyber offenses, and also foster cross-border cooperation among stakeholders. Somalia is yet to ratify this convention. This is really important to note that. If Somalia ratifies the convention, it will gain not only as a roadmap, but also a stronger legal legitimacy. That's what it's said to have. And it will also gain cross-border cooperation across members of the African continent. Now, another important point is that Somalia relies heavily on the African Union and the European Union for security and budget support. This is important because these partners can really influence and push for the ratification of this important convention. Also, this convention can really bring all these countries and develop this landscape, digital landscape, the rights, all of these. It will guide, it will give Somalia and provide a guide to it to really enact all these laws that we are reaching for. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, again, thank you all for joining this panel discussion. And we are talking a little bit about data protection and cybersecurity across the continent. We have heard from our colleagues from Zalando Trust in Kenya. We've heard from Ahmed from Somalia. And now let's move over to Haythem from Tunisia. So Haythem, could you talk a little bit about the digital rights landscape and of course in the context of data protection and cybersecurity in Tunisia?
Yeah, thank you, Bill. Hello again. So let's start with an overview about, if I can say, the timeline of digital rights laws and cyber crimes laws in Tunisia. In 2004, we put in place the first law regarding data protection, and we didn't respect it a lot until 2011. We had a revolution. After that, we put in place a new constitution, and we tried better to applicate the law in link with data protection. And 2015, we started already to discuss as civil society and also decision makers about putting in place cyber crimes law and ameliorate also the data protection law, as it was a very old law. When we speak about 2004, this law was put in place before having the most important platforms, social media platforms and other internet platforms. The work was very hard from both sides, from the side of civil society and also from the side of decision makers. And we had many problems at this time because we have a very security approach regarding working on digital rights in general, and we worked at this time a lot with AccessNow about, for example, the biometric ID, because we received a proposition from the government to stock biometric information or biometric data in a database, and it was very risky for the protection of data. So after that, in 2021, the president decided to dissolute the parliament and cancel the constitution and put in place a new constitution. After that, he put also in place a Decree 54. I ask you to search about it because it's our main issue now with digital rights and especially cyber crimes. This law was a law dedicated to or against cyber crimes, but and we had many problems with this decree, especially when we are talking about precise definition of crimes online, and we put in this law many large definitions, so it became like a tool to limit the freedom of expression, and also it was like a very high risky law regarding data protection. So if I can focus on two articles in this law, it will be the Article 24 about other crimes. We are talking about insults, fake news, intellectual property, etc. So those crimes are already, we can find those crimes out of digital space. So we put it also in this law, so with a penalty of prison more than 5 years. And it was like an article to limit the freedom of expression online. So, and the second article was the Article 6 of the same decree. This article authorized two telecommunication operator to stock all information of all users at least for 2 years, and it was a very security approach, so it put the data information or information of all users in risk. So after this law, Tunisia signed the Budapest Convention, and actually our situation is we have this decree 54 not aligned with this convention, and we are trying to work, if I can answer later this question, but we are now working from our side as civil society, and we are trying also to do a big work, advocacy work with decision makers, and especially with deputies to do amendment of some article in this decree to make it aligned with the Budapest Convention.
Thank you. So just to kind of like stay in North Africa, and I know you've worked with quite a number of countries in North Africa as well. How do you think regional solidarity could help, could strengthen advocacy efforts that, of course, you guys have been doing in the Northern African region?
Yeah, I think we have the same problem in all North African countries. So we have the necessity to put in place a cybercrimes law, but at the same time we should respect the freedom of expression and the protection of data users, if I can say it like that. So if we have many study cases from many countries, we can use it in advocacy campaigns. We are starting doing an advocacy campaign in Tunisia with many deputies, but also we try to implicate unions like journalist union, because they are very damaged by this law, for example. So we can use the experience of union and other civil society from other countries to give more information and test. Okay, so in advocacy level, I think have a network already between many organizations in North Africa, maybe also in Africa, because we have the same level of issues with those laws. So we can use those, experience and advocacy campaign to try to influence pub, public policies to go on a good way.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so now I'll move over to Naro from AccessNow, co-host. So Naro, if you could first of all tell us about the Nigeria's SIM NIN policy, what it is, and if you could also touch on the significant human rights impact that that particular policy has.
Thank you. So maybe a good place to start from would be that just going back. So Nigeria operates a multi-layered biometric identity system, and which means that different kinds of identity databases are operated by different government institutions for different reasons. So for example, we have the bank verification number system, which is operated by the Central Bank of Nigeria for financial purposes. We have the National Identification Number, which is operated by the Nigerian Identity Management Commission. We also have the Voters Registration Database, which is another biometric identification system. We have the one that's operated by the Independent National Electoral Commission with the Voters Register for elections. And so all of these are operating at the same time, collecting similar types of data, but different amounts of data. In fact, like I don't think like you could walk into a Nigerian government office without being asked to put your fingerprint somewhere or being asked to register it. At every single point, you're required to do this. But in recent years, what the government has tried to do is to harmonize these different frameworks, and the means by which they've tried to do this is through the National Identity Number System, which is the NIN. And the sense of this is to use the NIN as a central reference point for everything concerning a person's identity, and by connecting that NIN number with your SIM card, the idea is to have like a comprehensive reference point for everything concerning someone's identity. There have been many problems with this. So Nigeria started SIM registration in 2011. At first, we were just putting in basic information. It wasn't as intrusive. It wasn't as intrusive. We're just putting in basic information. But then by 2021, the NIN SIM policy had been introduced. And I would say that the NIN SIM policy is possibly the greatest implementation obstacle to Nigeria's data protection framework. When the policy was introduced, Nigeria did not have a data protection law. We only had the data protection regulation, which was administered by the Technology Development Agency. Our data protection regulation was passed in 2019, and then by 2023 we actually did sign a very comprehensive Data Protection Act. But the problem is thinking through the fact that our SIM registration database started being built in 2011 up till 2021, where we now integrate it with NIN. There's, just considering how many people are in Nigeria, there's hundreds of, more than 100 million different kinds of different people's identity in those databases. And since this law has been passed, there has been no effort from the government to align the existing database or even current, like future data collection practices with the Data Protection Act. And I'd say there are very clear reasons why this is important, and why I say that the SIM NIN policy itself is perhaps one of the greatest challenges to the full implementation of the Data Protection Act. So Nigeria's Data Protection Act, in Part 5, it begins with the principles of data protection, and this very much mirrors what you would see in the GDPR. Nigeria has a very comprehensive data protection act. Like I will say that it's not perfect, but it's quite comprehensive and it's very useful. So it begins very clearly with the same principles of data protection, of data collection and processing that you see in the GDPR. The first is that data should be collected in a fair, transparent, and lawful manner, which implies consent freely obtained. The second is that the personal data should be collected for specific purposes and should be limited to the purpose for which it's being collected. The third is that the data collected should be limited to the minimum that's necessary for which it's being collected. And that the fourth is the data should not be retained for longer than it's necessary. Fifth principle there is that the data being collected should be accurate and should be kept up to date. And the sixth and final principle, again, you see this in the GDPR, is that the data should be processed in a manner that ensures its security. And so here's where this is interesting. The problem is that the same name policy operates completely contrary to all of these principles. And I can take them one by one. The first is in terms of consent. I think my colleague Grace raised a very interesting point with WorldCoin when people were being paid for their personal data to be collected that cannot be have said to be collected in a lawful manner because consent is not freely given. The same thing in Nigeria, where you fail to provide data for the SIM name linkage, you're disconnected. Your SIM is cut off. I think the last disconnection exercise happened around July last year, and they disconnected 40 million SIM cards. And this is really concerning because in Nigeria, you need your SIM name to do everything from opening a bank account to registering for national exams to applying for any kind of like public welfare service. I remember a few years ago when Nigeria was facing like serious economic challenges, and one of the interventions that a government introduced in a particular local government area in the states was that they were sharing bags of rice to people, but you needed to provide your name in order to be able to get bags of rice. And if you know what people have gone through to get this, lots of people couldn't get that simply because they didn't have their name. And when you think of the penalty for non-compliance, you cannot, in its real sense, describe this as being freely given consent or freely obtained consent. The second one is the purpose limitation. And I should have said this earlier. One of the ways that the SIM name policy was presented and introduced to Nigerians was that the government had framed it as something that was necessary for for national security. So, talking about the fact that they need this information. Telcos need to have this information on a KYC level. They need to know who has a SIM card, who's using a SIM card, and so on. And we asked ourselves the question, we asked them the question, if this is for KYC purposes, then why do you need my fingerprints? Why do you need to have you have my name, you have my address. You only need my fingerprint and my biometric identification because you want to use it for surveillance. This is not, there's no sense of purpose limitation here. In fact, the idea behind the NIN-SIM, like I said earlier, is to create a multi-purpose identity database that does bank account opening, that does education services. And once you have that multi-purpose concept behind it, the purpose limitation principle is completely violated. The third one is, okay, I already talked about the data minimization one. So the fourth one is the idea that you do not, the principle that you do not retain the data for longer than is necessary. The problem with this is that the SIM name linkage is supposed to last for the duration of a SIM card. And I don't know I don't know how long a SIM card lasts because I think I only got my first SIM card in like 2004 or something. But I know that there are people who have had SIM cards for that long and there are no signs of that being changed. So this data is retained basically indefinitely. And that completely operates contrary to that data, requirements to not retain data longer than is necessary. You take all of this personal information from people, including biometric data that's so sensitive and cannot be changed, and you retain it indefinitely. the other principle, and this is probably, I think if there's any Nigerian here, this is something that really pinches us in the shoes, and it's the principle of ensuring accuracy of the data that you collect. So anybody in Nigeria, if you've registered your SIM card, done your NIN, and linked the both of them, and there were no issues, the data is completely accurate, you don't know what God has done for you. It's the exception rather than the rule for the data to be accurate. I remember the first time when they looked into the database in 2014. Do you know what they saw there? They saw pictures of goats and yam next to people's faces. You would see men, like a woman would have details of a man, or a man would have details of a woman. The data was so poorly collected, poorly organized. You would see your entire details next to the picture of a wild stranger, and you have and the process for correcting this data was so cumbersome. You would be under the sun for hours. You would queue, and they would tell you to come back the next day because the system is not working. And the entire process of even getting this corrected, in plenty of places, people had to pay money to get data collected correctly. And I mean, this also links to the sixth principle, which is that data should be processed in a manner that ensures its security. These registrations from the initial stage when they were done by third-party resellers, people who were selling SIM cards on the side of the road. And these people received no training or no instruction beyond the basic, this is how to impute data into the system, this is how to collect fingerprints. There was no sense of what the security of that data should be. And the result of that is that we've seen so many cases of breach. We've seen breach both from the level of like the government's database, because the Nigerian Identity Management Commission a few years ago started to implement a NIN verification system. And the idea behind that was that if perhaps you were an employer or a business person wanting to do business with somebody, and you collected their NIN, like, I'm coming to work for you, what is your NIN? And I give you my NIN number. You impute it into the bank verification system, and then you'd get all my information. But that was so unfortunately done that all of that data is just like out in the wild. It's just open there. There was no security provided for that system. There's very hardly any sense of who was allowed to access this data, so that entire database has been compromised. Our partners are currently in court, like challenging the security of that data and the measures that the government has taken to keep it safe. And I mean, we could see very easily that I hate to say this, but there are websites right now on the internet where if you put in my name, you would see all my information there. And it is so scary to be living like in that, without that security, without any control over your data. We have no idea who gets this and what they use it for. And despite this, despite all of these lawsuits, despite all of these efforts, the government is not mandating any kind of data protection impact assessment. They're not doing anything to strengthen to protect like the data that has already been, released online and so on. And it's really concerning because we're pretty much at the mercy of whoever chooses to access that data and whatever they choose to use it to do. Yeah.
Thank you, Naro, for sharing that. And I think it resonates with a lot of experiences we're seeing from other countries. I think Kenya has the Huduma number, which is they also have a national identification kind of a number. And I think I've also personally seen certain instances where you even go to a bank counter and because someone forgot their national ID card, they put it just by the counter so that if they ever happen to come back, they can actually see it and request for it. And then without really knowing that you're actually exposing a lot of personally identified information. But I think I've also seen other instances where someone might drop their bank cards and certificates and stuff, and then you see them being shared on WhatsApp groups. Like, hey, I've actually found this, if they belong to you, this is my phone number, call me. But that's a lot of information actually being shared. So I think, what you're saying kind of really resonates you know, a lot with some of the experiences that we're seeing in a number of countries. So, I mean, I've heard quite a number of things that you've said, and I just wanted to find out from you, what is this CSO, what is this civil society and maybe other stakeholders doing to address some of these impacts?
So like I mentioned, I think even very early in 2011, when the first policy, when the SIM registration policy was introduced, one of the first things that happened was that human rights organizations went to court. They sued the government, challenging them on two grounds. The first was the exclusionary impacts of the policy, because without your SIM card being registered, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this. And the second was on the privacy challenges. At that time, we did not have a data protection law in place. We didn't even have a data protection regulation. I would say that fortunately, one of the things that came out of those early lawsuits was the, push from the government to finally pass the data protection regulation and finally pass the Data Protection Act. Those lawsuits have been helpful in that space, but there are other challenges, of course. There's the congestion of the courts and the fact that it takes so long for these cases to move through the courts and for you to get any kind of real justice. The second challenge is that it's very difficult to implement judgment against government. Even when you get a very clear court judgment, it's very difficult to get the government to comply. But I will say, I think besides the lawsuits, something like, civil society organizations, like including many of the partners that AccessNow works with in Nigeria, they have done a lot of work to engage with the government, to engage with the Data Protection Commission, training their officers on best practices in data protection. And most importantly, I think one of the things that civil society is doing and is really keen to achieve in Nigeria is to insist on data protection impact assessment for the policy and for all of the different layers through which it operates. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So a round of applause to all our speakers. Thank you all for all your insights. And I'd like to now open up to the audience for any follow-up questions that you might have or any experiences in light of what they've shared. This is your opportunity. Yes, gentlemen at the end.
Good morning. My name is Adedeji Adeniro. The conversation has been very great. So I've heard from the speakers around the GPDR, the influence on our countries. Have heard about the Malabo Convention. I just want to know the appetite. If speakers could share the appetite for the African Data Policy Framework that was implemented by AU in 2002. This is meant to be African kind of regional approach, similar to GPR, but really having the kind of context and culture and the need of African integrated read. To what extent has that been influencing data protection laws and governance in the different countries? I would appreciate if the speaker can share things around this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other question? We'll take about 3 questions and then we'll ask our speakers to respond. I think the gentleman needs some transcription. Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. My name is Brenda Namata, and I'm from Policy. My question, I think it is to the speaker from Nigeria. Thank you so much for the submissions. I wish to inquire about the question on the right to forget, as far as platform accountability is concerned from tech or platform companies, and also the question on data monetization. You would understand that between the aspect of research ethical balance, as far as data scrapping is concerned, there's a lot of access to data of platform users from a point of once you can pay, then you can access information from people. But with the gap of platforms failing to delete or even giving the right to deletion of personal data in a specific period of time, it means that very compromising or sensitive data of individuals can easily be accessed. I mean, we all fall short or guilty of a period when we shared so much of personal information out of ignorance, and therefore we deserve a right to delete that information from the platforms. But once it continues to exist, then therefore it means that it can be accessed by any researchers under the grounds of monetization. From an advocacy perspective, how do you think we can push as civil society to see that we achieve the right to forget from platforms and also the upper hand of platform accountability on the same question?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, sir?
Okay, thank you. My name is Femi. I'm from the Human Rights Foundation. Thank you for the gentleman who mentioned, or the person who mentioned WorldCoin. We find that lots of people on the continent do not see their data necessarily as something that is valuable, which is why in many cases they don't have problems exchanging it for even very tiny amounts, or don't mind when the data is mishandled. Any ideas, any information on work that's going around growing citizen understanding and appreciation of the value of their data and what can be done from a citizen push standpoint? Because it feels most times when we're engaging with governments, it's mostly coming from CSOs. But if the citizens themselves are not asking, then the government kind of feels, well, if the people themselves are not worried, then what's your own? And it's very easy to then ignore CSO push. So any ideas on how you actually get groundswell of support and engagement from citizens around the subject of data? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So who would like to go first? The panelists? We have about 3.5 questions. I know there's a specific question for Naro on the right to forget and the data monetization. Did you want to? Yeah.
Yes, okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that the first thing is, with Nigeria's Data Protection Act, I think the first thing is in acknowledging that that principle exists. The data subject has the right to, demand erasure of that data. That is in our laws. What we've seen is that the problem isn't necessarily in the law, because it's quite clearly written there. The problem is in how tech companies, specifically tech companies outside of Nigeria, big tech companies, how they comply or do not comply with that provision. So recently, I think in 2003, the Federal Competition and Consumer Protection Commission did an investigation into Meta's Facebook and Facebook's privacy policy and how it operated in Nigeria. And they found that despite the fact that Nigeria's data protection law, specifically the requirements for consent, mirror what you have in the GDPR, Facebook was still offering its general privacy policy to Nigerians while offering a different policy to the EU and to the UK, whereas we had the same provisions in our law. And so they fined Facebook. When you say, what should civil society organizations do about it, I think definitely it's important for us to work and raise awareness and educate the public and raise these issues. But I think at its core, it's a matter of how does government implement this policy. And it's still a find that has been challenged. The government did do their findings, they did their research, they examined the policy against Nigeria's data protection law, and they very clearly saw that the policy was operating in violation of that law. And so they raised this to Facebook, and Facebook challenged the fine. There was a judgment by the High Court, and I think that our judgment is being appealed. So we're still watching to see how that plays out. But I think that it would be, whatever the case, it would be a landmark judgment. It would be something to see how and see if and how the government is able to implement that. But I would say, like, just to summarize, it is a very clear provision in our law that people should have the right to demand for erasure of their data. People should have control over their data, and that the people consenting specifically for AI machine learning purposes, people's consent is required based on Nigerian law. And when tech companies do not comply with those provisions, then there are agencies, there are government bodies in Nigeria that are actually working to implement those provisions. And I guess it's only a matter of time before we see how the case plays out, but it's definitely something that we welcome, that we want to see being implemented stronger.
You can hear me. Yes, I could go next and maybe try to attempt to answer the gentleman who asked the question on WildCoin. So it's quite interesting looking at it because economic incentives given to data, it really undermines the validity of consent. So maybe to just contextualize for the Kenyan, the typical Kenyan, we treat personal data so casually. We give our ID copies, phone numbers, biometrics without thought. And it's not the fault of the citizen because most services actually require it. And if you don't share that information, it normally means exclusion. And then the benefits of privacy seem very abstract to just the normal person. And the cost of protection also feels inconvenient. And there's also limited awareness of what happens once this data is collected. So we need to try and shift to see, let's look at our data. It's like your digital fingerprint, just like the same way you protect your ID. And that means having continuous public education campaigns, storytelling and giving real-life examples. For example, sharing cases where misuse of data led to harm, and also trying to link that data to tangible value. Maybe if we can shift to that, then maybe can actually understand that your data is your digital fingerprint. It will take a while, but it's something that I believe that we can all do. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone wants to take the first question on the appetite for African data protection frameworks? Yeah. Can I have an offline conversation, or do you want him to rephrase the question? Yes.
Thank you very much, panelists. My name is Muhammad Adid Ali. I'm from Somalia. In the context of Somalia, now reaching a digital advance or digital development because internet users, mobile connectivity, and mobile speed, digital mobile transfer is very high. But the problem is the digital literacy, the digital rules and regulations, gender and inclusion, and the most problem of encounter the country is illiteracy issues because cybersecurity attacks outside the countries. For example, Kenya, Nigeria, and other African countries. So how can regional conventions can sort that problems? Because most hackers came outside the countries that should not able to protect the entire institutions that problem. So I need that to ask a question, Sarah.
Do you want to attempt that?
Maybe I could attempt the question on the gentleman on the Malabo Convention. I believe he was referring to the Malabo Convention. So maybe just to speak about Kenya's experience with the alignment of this convention, and I'll take you through how it aligns with Kenya's Data Protection Act. So the convention standard speaks about the establishment of a National Data Protection Authority, which we do have the ODPC in place. individual digital rights, things such as access correction, objection, deletion, that has also been fully enshrined, registration of data controllers and processors, that is now mandatory, cross-border transfer safeguards, which has been included and has adequate level of protection, and sanctions for violations. So when we look at it from the Kenyan perspective, as much as it was inspired greatly by the GDPR, it also satisfied the Malabo Convention's requirements. And we know the Malabo Convention matters because it seeks to promote harmonized data protection standards across the country. And the biggest challenge, of course, has been slow ratification by the countries, capacity gaps, overlap with national laws in some instances, and key emerging issues that the convention did not foresee. Kenya's appetite for it, I will say, just most recently, I think about a week ago, the Office of the Data Protection Commission got cabinet approval to ascension of the Malabo Convention, and they are holding a lot of stakeholder engagement on that. So there's a sign of positive uptake on the Malabo Convention so far. And of course, also the ODPC has rolled out nationwide awareness campaigns to educate Kenyans about their data rights, privacy, and the Data Protection Act. So I will say there is an appetite, if I may put it like that, to actually ratify this convention. I hope I've attempted to answer your question. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Naro?
Yes, maybe just to add from the Nigerian perspective on that, I would say that it's also very similar in as much as the Nigerian Data Protection Act very heavily mirrors the GDPR. It does align with the Malabo Convention on many of the provisions and requirements that my colleague has shared, in the sense that the mandates for establishing a data protection authority has been complied with. We have the Nigerian Data Protection Commission, their requirements for registration of data processors, provisions on cross-border data transfer and levels of adequacy as well. What I will say is that Nigeria only signed onto the Malabo Convention after it had come into force in January of 2024, I believe, and there are some efforts towards ratification and accession, but unfortunately it's likely going to take a while, considering the fact that Nigeria only acceded to the Budapest Convention in 2022, and which is a very long time after the convention itself had come into force. But I think that even before having that formally in our legal system, it is important to just remember that there is alignment. The alignment exists based on the Data Protection Act that we have. So I mean, I don't know if that answers the question, but I hope that helps.
Yes, we'll take the final comment.
Thank you for the floor. My name is Christian Fazili. I'm from the DRC. I work as a public prosecutor. I would like to make first the comment about the Malabo Convention, which has been criticized as it's not updated, because the Malabo Convention took more than around 10 years to come into force, and there are some aspects which are not updated. The question related, for instance, on AI, they are not integrating the Malabo Convention. So even if it is, it's coming to force, but it's not updated. As a prosecutor and a judge, a legal practitioners, we are confronted with this issue. What is in my mind, my question is to the panel is, how can African states, especially those with the weaker institution like the DRC, where I come from, practically strengthen both the national legal frameworks and regional cooperation, so that the data protection and cybersecurity to become the tool for safeguarding rights and not instrument of control or repression? Thank you.
Jacinda, did you want to,
yes,
if you could make it brief, kindly, the lady at the back? Yeah.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Anita Ahewa from the Personal Data Protection Office of Uganda. I didn't really want to give a comment, but I wanted to ask a question on something that I feel has been an issue for quite a while. Now, global tech companies often operate in Africa with minimal accountability to local laws. And I think most of us have seen and know some examples of these. So for the regulators, what can we do to ensure that these multinational corporations respect African data protection and cybersecurity frameworks? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so I'll request if we could,
yes,
you could make it really brief, like 15 seconds, sorry, we're running out of time.
Thank you very much, Bill. In short, I would like to ask my colleague from Kenya, Dear Grass, from Zalando Trust. In short, I would like to ask her just how Zalando Trust can contribute to the digital landscape in Kenya when it comes to projects or non-project activities, such engaged with the department or other agencies, ministries, in line ministries with the digital activities, such example, let me, when it comes in Somali context, we mostly have activities engaging with the government without project dependent. So sometimes you faces the project is ending, and when it needs to mobilize the communities in digital activities. So without project dependence, can trust make impact to the community of the Kenya? If yes, how? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I would like to request that we respond to the questions as we also give our recommendations. And then I would like to request that we at least do 1 minute each, if that's okay. Yeah, so as you respond to the questions that have been raised, you also provide your recommendations. Yeah. All right. Thank you. And then we'll close because we're running out of time. Yeah. Ahmed.
Okay, I would like to respond to the regulation in terms of the private sector, tech companies. Our context in Somalia is really kind of different from most countries of the panelists. That's what I think. We have a private sector or telecommunication companies that actually grew in terms of influence and power before all of these regulations existed. In the context of Somalia, if, as all of you, most of you might be aware, we've been through a civil war, a long civil war, and we've been through building of the governance system. So the approach for us is really different, as these companies hold both the framework, the technological framework and the infrastructure, and as well as the user base. So as civil society organizations, we cannot afford to alienate them, as they are too powerful and influential. And they also influence the formation of policies as well as the implementation of these policies. So our approach and practical strategy was to collaborate with them and to maybe have them self-regulate and set standards for themselves and their clients. That's how I would answer. If I move forward to my actionable recommendations, the first recommendation, and I base these recommendations to our context, if I will, is to have funding for our institutions, the most important of which are the Data Protection Authority and the SOMCERT, not only funding, but also capacity building, as these are fairly new institutions, and they lack all of these, as well as the capacity and for enforcement, and also they lack independence. If possible, we would request or have most of these countries, panelist countries, or even Namibia or other more advanced countries in terms of these capacity, because we find as civil society organizations, most of the time we find ourselves competing for the same resources as the urgent humanitarian and security national issues. So we frame these awareness and all these campaigns differently from all other countries. We frame them as a basic human right, the digital right as a basic human right, so that it could have the attention, the same attention as the other human rights issues. So possibly if we could have maybe Nigeria, Naro, we could have capacity building, maybe assist our DPA authority and all that. And moving forward is important to safeguard cybersecurity laws and ensure that transparency and civil society input. A great example is the current cybersecurity bill that we have, that we're trying to have our input as civil society and ensure that security does not come at the cost of our rights, right? So consultation and public participation is really important in this before passing of these laws, as well as the implementation.
Thank you.
Third, may I just complete real quickly?
You could just summarize.
We would like to push for alignment of this AU Malabo Convention and have request AU and EU to really influence, as they have the leverage and the responsibility to influence our authorities to enact and ratify this convention, as well as engage with the private sector, telecom companies, that, as I mentioned before, to have all of these frameworks put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Grace?
All right, I'll attempt and answer the gentleman who asked the question from DRC, I'm right. Part of the actionable recommendations that we would like to make for the government, of course, is to adequately finance the Office of the Data Protection Commission or data protection authorities in other countries to ensure independence and effective oversight. Secondly, I have noted that in various African countries, there's a mischievous act, or rather bill, known as Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. I've seen, I think there's a bill in Malawi. We have one, I think, in Zambia. And these laws have some very vague provisions that can be misinterpreted to fit the political narrative of the day, if you know what I'm talking about. So we want this to align with the Constitution and international human rights standards. Thirdly, for the government, of course, accelerate domestication of regional frameworks like the Malabo Convention, and also have continuous conversations on the AI strategy, at least for the continent. And of course, also integrate data protection into the economic and digital transformation agenda for various countries. As for civil society, I will say continuous digital literacy campaigns to raise awareness. Also expanding strategic litigation. I think it's very important to go to court, because court decisions help shape policy, strengthen legal frameworks, and protect citizens in a digital society. It's very important to keep on going to court to expand jurisprudence in these areas, and of course strengthen coalition and cross-learning among different countries. And finally, for the private sector, prioritize compliance with data protection laws, invest in robust cybersecurity systems to protect users and reduce vulnerabilities, This also links to government. As I'd said earlier, we had an issue with the business registration service in Kenya where there was a very huge data breach. So they need to invest in robust cybersecurity systems. And finally, of course, embed human rights impact assessments into technology. And just my last comment will be, digital rights must be grounded in privacy, inclusion, and accountability to rebuild public trust. And also, it's almost like fireproof it from legal and ethical scrutiny. Of course, it's not bad to scrutinize, but let us have them grounded in accountability, inclusion, and privacy. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. And Haythem?
Thank you, Will. So I think I go forward directly with some global recommendation. Very quick, I think Tunisia didn't sign the Malabo Convention, but we signed in 2024 the Budapest Convention. So I think the most important thing now is to precise out or to be very very clear with definition of cyber crimes, because for example, as I explained about Decree 54 in Tunisia, when we put some other crimes in the cyber crimes law, you find yourself with a restriction on freedom of expression with this law. Second thing, we should push decision makers to put a lot of restriction on stockage of data, and we put a lot of restriction on using this data stockage. So the last recommendation will be for, I think, for civil society in general, but also for Tunisian civil society to push also to give more power and money to data protection commission, because we have a data protection commission, but without money and power we can do anything, especially working with civil society. So that's all from my end.
Thank you. And finally, Naro. Thank you.
So I think in the interest of time, I wouldn't repeat most of what has already been shared, because these are globally applicable recommendations, really. But I will attempt to answer the question about holding big tech accountable and big tech regulation. And from Nigeria, interestingly, we have the two extreme ends of what that looks like. Around the same time when the Meta case was being investigated, Nigeria had a Twitter shutdown because somebody did not like the fact that Twitter took down his tweet and responded by terminating access to Twitter for the whole country. So that's what not to do. At the same time, we saw the FCCPC going through the process, following the rule of law. They completed their investigation. They looked at the laws. They looked at the numbers. They demanded compliance. And when the company did not comply, then they issued the fine. And one thing that they never did through all of it was to block access to any of those services. In fact, when Facebook responded by saying that rather than complying with the government's instructions, they were going to turn off access for Nigerians. And I mean, that's one of there are very few opportunities that civil society and government can completely agree on something, but that was one place where there was a very strong alignment that this is not the response, this is not the way to address this. So in all the sense of, in as much as it is important for companies from wherever to comply with the laws in anywhere where they're offering services, where they're gaining economic benefits, it's important for that compliance to be in line with the rule of law. So that's really, I mean, I'm not a regulator, so I can't speak very strongly to what they should do, but I think that we can all agree on what they should not do, and that is to punish the entire population in an effort to secure compliance. Thank you.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end. So please join me in closing the speakers. So thank you, Naro. Thank you, Haythem. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Grace. And that brings us to the end. I'd like to really request that we keep the conversation going beyond this room for a stronger rights respecting digital Africa. Thank you all for staying, and yeah, that marks the end of this session. Have a good one.